20 years ago, Haven's Gate was nothing like the war zones that would come later. The colony world sat on the edge of human space, a green planet with 2 moons and forests that glowed purple at night. It was the first place where humans and Valarians tried to live together in peace. 10-year-old Katie Morrison hated the place at first. Her father, Ambassador Richard Morrison, had dragged her halfway across the galaxy to this remote world where she knew nobody. Earth was home, with its blue skies and normal trees, and kids who looked like her. Here, everything felt wrong and strange. That changed the day she met Zara Quinn. Katie had been exploring the gardens behind the diplomatic compound, bored and lonely, when she saw the alien girl sitting by a fountain. Zara Quinn had violet skin that shimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes were large and dark like pools of ink. She wore simple robes, despite being the daughter of High Commander Thel Quinn, the most powerful military leader in the Valarian Empire. The 2 girls stared at each other for a long moment. Then, Zara Quinn smiled, and Katie realized that smiles looked the same on any face. They became friends that day. It did not matter that one was human and one was Valarian. It did not matter that their peoples had only just stopped being strangers. They both liked to climb trees, even though Katie was better at it. They both hated formal dinners, where they had to sit still and be quiet. They both dreamed of flying between the stars on their own ships someday. Katie taught Zara Quinn how to skip stones across the pond. Zara Quinn taught Katie how to read the patterns of light that danced across Valarian skin when they felt strong emotions. They shared secrets and made up games and explored every corner of the diplomatic grounds together. Katie's older brother Jake watched from a distance, always serious and quiet. He was 13 and spent most of his time training with the security forces. Their father wanted him to be strong, to be ready for anything. Jake never played with them, but Katie knew he was always keeping an eye on her. That was what big brothers did. The friendship between Katie and Zara Quinn became famous on Haven's Gate. Ambassador Morrison and High Commander Thel Quinn often pointed to the 2 girls as proof that humans and Valarians could build something good together. News broadcasts across both civilizations showed images of the human girl and the alien princess playing in the gardens. But not everyone was happy about it. There were Valarians who thought humans were too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable to be trusted. There were humans who thought the Valarians looked down on them and wanted to control human expansion into space. These voices grew louder as disputes over territory in the Outer Rim turned bitter. Katie and Zara Quinn did not care about politics. They were children, and children have better things to do than worry about border disputes and trade agreements. One day, Katie gave Zara Quinn a gift. It was a simple silver bracelet, the kind human girls wore. Inside, Katie had used a laser engraver to etch Earth's coordinates. "So you can always find your way to visit me," Katie said. Zara Quinn's skin rippled with colors that Katie had learned meant happiness mixed with sadness. The Valarian girl reached into her robes and pulled out a crystalline pendant on a chain. It glowed with soft blue light, and patterns swirled inside it like living things. "This is from my family," Zara Quinn said. "Only the royal bloodline can make these. Wear it, and everyone will know you are under our protection." They hugged, and Katie felt the pendant warm against her chest. She did not know it would be one of the last good memories she would ever have. 3 weeks later, everything fell apart. A human mining ship was attacked in disputed space. The Valarians said the humans had violated their territory. The humans said the Valarians had fired without warning. Both sides sent warships. Tensions that had been building for months finally exploded into violence. Ambassador Morrison got the order to evacuate. He had 48 hours to get every human off Haven's Gate before the Valarian military shut down all access to the planet. The High Commander had apologized personally, but the hardliners in the Valarian government were taking control. There was nothing he could do. Katie cried when her father told her they were leaving. She ran to find Zara Quinn one last time. They met in the gardens where they had first become friends. Both girls were crying, though Valarian tears were silver and caught the light like metal. I will find you again, Zara Quinn promised. When I am grown and have power of my own, I will make sure our people are friends again. I will wait for you, Katie said. They held hands, human fingers wrapped around Valerian ones, and made a promise that children make when they think promises can stop the world from being cruel. Jake came to get his sister. He was wearing combat gear now, and he looked older than 13. He nodded respectfully to Zara Quinn, but his face was hard. He had heard things, seen things that made him understand the world was more dangerous than any of them had wanted to believe. The Morrison family left Haven's Gate on a transport ship crowded with refugees. Katie pressed her face against the window, watching the purple forests fall away below. She held the crystalline pendant tight in her hand. They never made it home to Earth. 3 days into the journey, raiders attacked the convoy. Some said they were pirates. Some said they were Valarian military ships without identification. The truth died with most of the people on Katie's transport. Jake survived because he had been on a different ship with the security forces. Ambassador Morrison survived because he had been needed on the command vessel. Katie Morrison, age 10, died in the cold of space, still holding an alien princess's pendant. The news reached Zara Quinn weeks later. By then, the Valerian Empire and the human colonies were already at war. By then, it was too late for anything except grief and rage. Jake Harrison grew up fast after that. He joined the military as soon as he was old enough. He trained harder than anyone else. He fought smarter than anyone else. He became the warrior that his father had tried to prepare him to be. And he never forgot that his sister died because 2 civilizations could not find a way to stay friends. 20 years passed. The war grew and spread. Billions died on both sides. The innocent dreams of 2 children in a garden seemed like something from another universe entirely. But the pendant and the bracelet remained, carried by 2 people who no longer remembered what it meant to hope for peace. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the warship Valiant and watched the last Valerian fortress burn. Smoke rose from the capital city of Thalsora in thick black columns that stained the purple sky. The war was over. Humanity had won. He felt nothing. The crew around him celebrated quietly, professionally. They had all been soldiers too long to cheer like civilians. Victory meant they might get to go home. It meant no more friends dying in the dark between stars. But it did not erase the 15 years they had spent fighting. Jake was 30 years old and looked older. His face had scars from battles on a dozen worlds. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had seen too much death. He wore his uniform like armor, and maybe that was what it had become. The medals on his chest represented operations where good people had died following his orders. The Valerian Empire had learned to fear Commander Jake Harrison. He did not fight like other human officers. He used tricks and traps. He hit supply lines instead of armies. He made the enemy paranoid and exhausted before striking at their weak points. The Valerians had better technology and more ships, but Jake understood something they did not. Humans were stubborn and desperate and willing to do whatever it took to survive. Now he had to be a peacemaker instead of a warrior. The unified Earth government had made him military governor of the occupied territories. His job was to make sure the Valarians accepted their defeat and did not start the war again. He hated politics, but orders were orders. The shuttle took him down to the surface. Thalsora had been beautiful once. The Valarians built their cities to flow with the landscape instead of dominating it. Buildings grew like crystals from the ground, and gardens filled every space between. But war had broken that beauty. Human bombs had shattered the crystal towers. Valerian weapons had scorched the gardens to ash. Jake walked through the streets with his security team. Valerian civilians watched him pass, their skin flickering with colors that meant fear and anger. Children hid behind their parents. Old ones turned their faces away. He had done this. His strategies, his tactics, his refusal to accept anything less than total victory. These people would hate him for generations, and maybe they had the right to. His second-in-command, a tough woman named Lieutenant Chen, fell into step beside him. She had been with him since the early days of the war. "The surrender ceremony is set for tomorrow," she said. "The Valerian royal family will attend. Princess Zara Quinn will sign the treaty documents on behalf of her people." Jake nodded. He had read the intelligence reports on the princess. She was the daughter of High Commander Thel Quinn, who had died 3 years ago when Jake's forces destroyed the flagship Eternal Dawn. She had spent the war working in civilian relief, trying to help refugees and protect non-combatants. The reports said she hated violence and had argued against the war from the beginning. That did not change anything. She was still Valerian nobility. She was still part of the empire that had killed his sister. That night, Jake sat alone in his temporary quarters and stared at the 2 objects he always carried. One was a crystalline pendant that glowed with blue light. The other was a silver bracelet. Small and simple, with coordinates engraved on the inside. Katie had been wearing the pendant when she died. Jake had found it in the wreckage when they recovered the bodies. The bracelet had been in her other hand, held so tight they had to pry her fingers open. He had never understood where she got them. Maybe she had bought them on Haven's Gate before they evacuated. Maybe they had been gifts from other refugees. He had been too young and too angry to ask the right questions back then. Now they were all he had left of his little sister. He wore the pendant under his uniform every day. The bracelet stayed in a small box that went with him everywhere. Sometimes he dreamed about Haven's Gate. He remembered watching Katie play in the gardens with an alien girl whose name he had forgotten. They had seemed so happy, so innocent. He had been jealous sometimes, the way older siblings get jealous when younger ones make friends easily. He wondered what happened to that Valerian girl. Probably she grew up to be another soldier or noble, another person who wanted humans dead. The war had a way of turning everyone into the worst version of themselves. Jake did not sleep much that night. The next morning, he put on his dress uniform and made sure every medal was perfectly straight. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a stranger. The boy who used to watch his sister play was gone. Only the soldier remained. Across the city, Princess Zara Quinn prepared for the worst day of her life. She stood in her private chambers, now occupied territory, and dressed in the formal robes required for the surrender ceremony. The robes were white, the color of mourning in Valerian culture. Her attendants moved silently, their skin patterns showing the same grief she felt. Zara Quinn was 28 years old but felt ancient. The war had stolen her father, her friends, and her faith that the universe could be fair. She had spent 15 years watching her people suffer, trying to minimize the damage, begging the military leadership to seek peace. They had ignored her until it was too late. Now she had to stand in front of the human conqueror and admit defeat. She had to sign documents that gave humans control over Valerian territory. She had to smile and pretend this was anything other than the death of everything her civilization had built. She hated Commander Jake Harrison with a passion that surprised her. Zara Quinn did not consider herself a violent person. She had devoted her life to helping others, to protecting the innocent. But when she thought about the human commander who had broken her people's military, who had killed thousands of Valerian soldiers including her own father, she felt rage burn in her chest. Her attendants left her alone for a moment. Zara Quinn reached under her sleeve and touched the silver bracelet she always wore hidden against her skin. It was old and worn now. The engraving inside almost faded. A human girl had given her this bracelet 20 years ago. Katie Morrison, the daughter of an ambassador. The first real friend Zara Quinn ever had. They had promised to find each other again, to help their peoples stay friends. Instead, there had been war. Katie had died in the early days, killed when raiders attacked an evacuation convoy. Zara Quinn had cried for weeks when she heard the news. She had wanted to send a message to Katie's family, to tell them how much their daughter had meant to her. But by then, sending messages to humans was impossible. Sometimes Zara Quinn wondered if Katie had a family. Had there been parents who mourned her? Brothers or sisters? Had any of them survived the war? It did not matter now. The past was dead. Today she had to face the future. And the future was Commander Jake Harrison, dictating terms to a defeated empire. Zara Quinn left her chambers and walked through the palace halls. Human soldiers stood guard at every corner now. They watched her with hard eyes, hands near their weapons. She kept her face neutral, her skin patterns calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The grand hall was filled with people. Human military officers in neat uniforms, Valerian nobles who looked broken and ashamed, diplomats from neutral species who came to witness the end of the war. Cameras recorded everything for broadcast across 100 worlds. And at the center of it all stood Commander Jake Harrison. Zara Quinn saw him for the first time and felt something strange flicker in her chest. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and tired eyes. He stood perfectly still, perfectly controlled. But there was something in his face that reminded her of something she could not name. Their eyes met across the hall. For just a moment, the noise of the crowd faded away. Jake felt it too. Looking at the Valarian princess, he had the strangest sense that he had seen her before. But that was impossible. He had never met her. He had killed her father but never faced her directly. Still, something about the way she carried herself, the pattern of lights that danced across her violet skin, tugged at memories he thought he had buried forever. The ceremony began with speeches that nobody wanted to hear. Human officials talked about peace and reconstruction. Valerian representatives spoke with voices that shook, reading prepared statements about cooperation and the future. Everyone in the hall knew the words were empty. This was not peace. This was surrender. Jake stood at attention through all of it. He had learned long ago how to turn off his emotions during formal events. His face showed nothing as speaker after speaker took the podium. He was a statue in uniform, the perfect image of human military discipline. But he kept glancing at Princess Zara Quinn. She stood with her royal guard, her white robes flowing around her like water. Her face was proud despite the circumstances. She did not look defeated. She looked like someone enduring torture with dignity, and Jake found himself respecting that against his will. When it came time for the treaty signing, Zara Quinn walked forward alone. The hall fell silent. Every eye watched as she approached the table where the documents waited. Jake stood on the opposite side, representing the unified Earth government. They faced each other across the table. Up close, Jake could see the details of her face, the way her skin shimmered in the light, the sadness in her dark eyes, the set of her jaw that said she would rather die than show weakness. Zara Quinn looked at the human commander and felt her hatred waver. She had expected a monster. Instead, she saw a man who looked as tired as she felt. His eyes held the same kind of grief she saw in her mirror every morning. For a moment, she wondered what he had lost in this war. The signing took only minutes. Zara Quinn's hand shook slightly as she wrote her name in both Valarian and human script. Jake signed after her, his signature harsh and quick. It was done. The war was officially over. The reception afterward was worse than the ceremony. Jake had to make conversation with people who either feared him or hated him. Valarian nobles spoke to him with false politeness, their skin flickering with barely controlled anger. Human officers congratulated him, while their eyes showed exhaustion and trauma. He needed air. He stepped out onto a balcony that overlooked the ruined city. The two moons were rising, painting everything in silver light. He reached up without thinking and touched the pendant under his uniform collar, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. "Where did you get that?" Jake spun around. Princess Zara Quinn stood in the doorway, her eyes locked on his hand where he touched his collar. Her skin was rippling with colors he did not recognize, bright and chaotic. "I am sorry," Jake said, his hand dropping to his side. Zara Quinn moved closer. her eyes never leaving his collar. Jake's jaw tightened. His personal effects were none of her business. But something in her voice made him pause. She was not asking out of curiosity. She was demanding an answer, like her life depended on it. Slowly, he pulled the chain from under his uniform. The crystalline pendant hung between them, glowing with its soft blue light. Zara Quinn stopped breathing. She knew that pendant. She had made it herself when she was 10 years old. Following her mother's instructions on how to infuse the crystal with her family's unique light patterns. There was only one like it in the entire universe. "That is impossible," she whispered. "I gave that to Katie Morrison 20 years ago." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. "Katie Morrison," Zara Quinn repeated, her voice shaking now. "The ambassador's daughter. My friend on Haven's Gate. I gave her that pendant the day she evacuated. How do you have it?" Jake could not speak for a moment. The world had tilted sideways. When he finally found his voice, it came out rough. "Katie was my sister. She died when raiders attacked her transport 3 days after leaving Haven's Gate. I found this in the wreckage." Zara Quinn's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the balcony railing for support. "Your sister. You are Katie's brother." Jake, hearing his name spoken in that accent, with the soft way Valarians shaped human words, unlocked memories he had buried for 2 decades. Katie, chattering about her new friend. Katie begging him to come play with them in the gardens. Katie saying, "Zara Quinn thinks you are so serious all the time. Why don't you ever smile?" "You are the alien girl," Jake said, the realization crashing over him. They stared at each other, and suddenly, the past was alive between them. The gardens of Haven's Gate. 2 children, making promises. An older brother, watching from a distance, trying to stay strong while his little sister found joy in a dangerous universe. "She talked about you constantly," Zara Quinn said, tears forming in her dark eyes, silver tears that caught the moonlight. "She said you were teaching her how to be brave. She said you were her hero." Jake felt something break inside his chest. He had spent 20 years being strong, 20 years being the perfect soldier, 20 years turning his grief into weapons and his rage into strategy. But standing here, facing the one person who remembered Katie the way he did, all of that control shattered. "The raiders were not raiders," he said, his voice hollow. "It took me years to find out the truth. They were Valerian military ships. No identification. They fired on civilian transports. Katie died because your people wanted to send a message." Zara Quinn flinched like he had struck her. "No, I did not know. I was told it was pirates. The military told everyone it was pirates. The military lied," Jake said. "It was a black operation ordered by hardliners who wanted to destroy any chance of peace. They killed children to make sure humans and Valarians would never trust each other again. The truth hung between them. Ugly and brutal. The war that consumed 15 years and killed billions had started with the murder of a 10-year-old girl who just wanted to be friends with someone different." Zara Quinn pulled back her sleeve with shaking hands. The silver bracelet was still there, worn and old but unmistakable. Earth's coordinates were barely visible inside now, faded by time. "I never took it off," she said quietly. "I promised her I would find her again. I spent years trying to honor that promise. Trying to stop the war. Trying to protect civilians the way she would have wanted. But I failed. I failed her." Jake looked at the bracelet that his sister had given away, and at the pendant he had carried for 20 years. 2 gifts, exchanged by children who believed friendship could change the world. "They were not raiders," Zara Quinn said, understanding now. "They were my own people. The same ones who pushed my father into military aggression. The same ones who wanted this war. Hadamant, there's not raiders." "Yes," Jake said simply. Zara Quinn felt sick. All this time, she had mourned Katie's death and blamed faceless pirates. But it had been Valerians. Her own people had killed her only real friend, and then lied about it. The rage she felt toward Jake Harrison shifted, redirected toward the real monsters. "You have been fighting us because of what happened to Katie," she said. "I have been fighting because your empire invaded human colonies and killed millions of people," Jake corrected. "But yes, Katie's death taught me that Valerians could not be trusted, that they would kill innocent children and lie about it. Everything that came after confirmed what I learned that day. And I have been watching my people die in a war started by the same faction that killed your sister," Zara Quinn said bitterly. "The extremists won. They got exactly what they wanted. 20 years of hatred and death. They stood in silence. Two people who had been shaped by the same tragedy from opposite sides. The night air was cold, and the ruined city spread out below them like a monument to everything that had gone wrong. She would hate what we have become," Zara Quinn finally said. "Katie would hate that we spent 20 years killing each other." Jake thought about that. His little sister, who had been so quick to forgive, so ready to see the good in everyone. Yes, she would. "I have her bracelet," Zara Quinn said. "You have her pendant. We are all that remains of her dream." Jake looked at the Valerian princess, really looked at her for the first time. Not as an enemy, not as a symbol of the empire that took his sister, but as someone who loved Katie too. Someone who carried the same grief he did. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because there are people on both sides who want this war to continue," Zara Quinn said urgently. "Extremists who profit from conflict. They will try to sabotage the peace. And if they succeed, everything Katie believed in dies forever." Jake understood what she was saying. "You want to work together. I want to honor her memory," Zara Quinn said. "The way we should have done 20 years ago." They met in secret over the following weeks. Jake and Zara Quinn could not be seen working together openly. The human military would think their commander had gone soft. The Valerian nobles would call their princess a traitor, so they met in secure locations, shared encrypted communications, and built an alliance in the shadows. At first, it was purely tactical. Zara Quinn had information about Valerian extremist groups who were stockpiling weapons. Jake had intelligence about human officials who were sabotaging reconstruction efforts for profit. They traded data like the enemies they were supposed to be. But slowly, something else happened. They started to talk about Katie. "She was terrible at keeping secrets," Zara Quinn said one night as they reviewed security reports in a bunker beneath the palace. "She told me everything about her life on Earth, about her favorite foods and her favorite music, about how she missed her friends but was excited to see new worlds." Jake found himself smiling despite everything. "She used to leave notes hidden around our quarters. Just random thoughts or bad jokes. I would find them weeks after she wrote them." "Did she ever tell you about the time we tried to cook human food for a Valerian festival?" Zara Quinn asked. The patterns on her skin shifted to colors that meant amusement mixed with sadness. "We nearly burned down the kitchen. The security teams thought it was an attack." "I remember that," Jake said quietly. "I was on duty that day. I ran in ready to fight, and there were two 10-year-olds covered in flour, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. They shared more memories. Each story was a piece of Katie that had survived the war. Together, they rebuilt a picture of the girl they had both loved, the sister and the friend who had seen past species and politics to simple human kindness. But the work was dangerous. As they dug deeper into the extremist networks, they uncovered a disturbing truth. The same people who had ordered Katie's death were still in positions of power. On the Valerian side, there were nobles who would rather see their empire destroyed than accept peace with humans. On the human side, there were officials getting rich off military contracts who needed the conflict to continue. "There is going to be another attack," Zara Quinn said during one of their meetings. She had brought classified documents stolen from Valerian military archives. "The hardliners are planning something big. They want to make peace impossible." Jake studied the documents. His years of military experience let him read between the lines. "They are targeting the memorial ceremony," The one where we are supposed to honor the war dead from both sides. If they can kill enough people there, blame it on the other side. The ceasefire will collapse, Zaraquin said. We will be back at war within days. And they will probably try to kill us too, Jake added. 2 problems solved at once. Zaraquin looked at him steadily. Are you afraid? Terrified, Jake admitted. But Katie did not let fear stop her from making friends with an alien princess. I can at least try to be half as brave as my little sister. The memorial ceremony was scheduled for 3 weeks away. They had that long to stop the attack, expose the conspirators, and maybe, just maybe, give peace a real chance. Jake used his authority as military governor to quietly arrest human officials involved in the plot. He seized financial records that showed money flowing to extremist groups. He had to be careful because some of the conspirators had powerful friends, but he had spent 15 years fighting against impossible odds. He knew how to win. Zaraquin worked on the Valerian side. She called in old favors and made new alliances. She met with nobles who were tired of war and convinced them to support her. She exposed the hardliners who had lied about Katie's death and so many other things. It was dangerous work. Some of the people she confronted had private armies. They protected each other. When assassins came for Zaraquin, Jake's security teams were already in position. When human extremists tried to frame Jake for treason, Zaraquin provided evidence that cleared his name. They became partners, then allies, then something that might have been friends under different circumstances. Why are you doing this? Zaraquin asked him one night. They were reviewing security plans for the memorial ceremony, both exhausted from weeks of non-stop work. You could have just imposed military rule. You won the war. You do not need my help. Tense scattering. Tense scattering. Tense scattering. Tense scattering. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because Katie would be ashamed of me if I did not try. She believed in peace. She believed people could be better than their worst instincts. I spent 20 years proving her wrong. Maybe it is time I tried to prove her right. Zaraquin felt her skin patterns shift to colors she had not shown in years. Hope mixed with grief, mixed with something else she could not name. She would be proud of you, I think. The brother she admired, finally fighting for what she believed in. She would be proud of both of us, Jake said. The night before the memorial ceremony, they met one final time to review their plans. They had identified the extremists. They had set up countermeasures. They had coordinated security between human and Valerian forces for the first time since the war began. If everything went right, they would stop the attack and expose the conspirators. If anything went wrong, a lot of people would die. I am sorry, Zaraquin said suddenly. For everything my people did. For Katie. For the war. For all of it. Jake looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as a Valerian, or an enemy, or even as Katie's old friend. Just as a person who had tried to do the right thing in an impossible situation. I am sorry, too. For what my people did. For the lives I took. For your father. My father made his choices, Zaraquin said quietly. He was not a bad man. But he listened to the wrong voices. He let fear and pride push him into a war he did not truly want. In the end, he died for those choices. I mourned him, but I do not excuse him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the city was quiet. Tomorrow, it would be filled with thousands of people from both species, coming together to remember the dead. It would be the first real test of whether humans and Valarians could build something better than hatred. Do you think we can do this? Zaraquin asked. Really stop them? And make peace work? Honestly, I have no idea, Jake said. But Katie thought we could. She was 10 years old and believed that a human and a Valerian could be friends. That is either the height of childish innocence or the smartest thing anyone has ever figured out. I am betting on the latter. Zaraquin smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face and made her skin glow with warm colors. She really did change both our lives. She did, Jake agreed. And tomorrow, we finish what she started. The memorial ceremony began at dawn. Thousands of people gathered in the rebuilt gardens of Haven's Gate, which had been chosen specifically for its symbolic importance. This was where the peace had first been attempted. This was where it would be reborn, or die forever. Jake stood at the front in his dress uniform. Zara Quinn stood beside him in white robes. Between them was a monument they had commissioned together, a statue of two children holding hands. One human, one Valerian, a permanent reminder of what innocence had once dreamed. The speeches began. Representatives from both governments talked about reconciliation and the future. Families of the dead came forward to share memories. Human voices and Valerian voices mixed together, telling stories of loss that sounded the same in any language. Jake felt his hand drift to the pendant under his uniform. Zara Quinn touched the bracelet, hidden beneath her sleeve. They stood together, two people bound by grief and hope, waiting for the attack they knew was coming. And then it began. Explosions rocked the gardens. Armed extremists burst from hiding places, firing at the crowds. Screams filled the air as people ran in panic. The careful peace that had been building for weeks shattered in an instant. But Jake and Zara Quinn had been ready. Human security teams had been positioned in advance. Valerian guards, loyal to the princess, moved to protect civilians. The counterattack was swift and coordinated. Jake drew his weapon and moved into the chaos without hesitation. This was what he had trained for. This was what he was good at. He saw extremists trying to position weapons and took them down with precise shots. He saw civilians in danger and directed security forces to protect them. Zara Quinn was not a soldier, but she was brave. She used her authority to rally Valerian guards and direct evacuations. When a human child got separated from his parents, she picked him up and carried him to safety herself. Her white robes staining with dirt and blood. They fought side by side, human commander and alien princess, protecting the peace they had promised Katie they would build. The battle lasted 20 minutes, but felt like hours. When the smoke finally cleared, the extremists had been defeated. Some were dead, killed by security forces from both species. Others were captured, dragged away in restraints, while cameras recorded everything. Jake stood in the center of the gardens, his uniform torn and dirty, a cut bleeding above his eye. Zara Quinn stood beside him, her white robe stained with the purple dust of the ground and silver blood from where she had been grazed by a bullet. They were both breathing hard, both shaking with adrenaline. Around them, the crowd slowly emerged from cover. Humans and Valerians looked at each other, shocked to be alive. They looked at Jake and Zara Quinn, the commander and the princess who had fought together to save them. Someone started to clap. Then another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding, a sound that echoed across the gardens and throughout the city. It was not a cheer of victory. It was something deeper. Recognition, gratitude, hope. The images went out across 100 worlds within hours. News broadcasts showed the human commander and the Valerian princess standing together, weapons drawn, protecting civilians of both species. They showed Jake pulling a Valerian child to safety. They showed Zara Quinn treating wounded human soldiers with her own hands. The extremists had wanted to destroy the peace. Instead, they had created a symbol that would define a generation. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The conspiracy was exposed in full. Documents seized from the extremists proved that the same people had orchestrated attacks on both sides for 20 years, including the raid that killed Katie Morrison. The revelations shocked both civilizations. Human officials who had profited from the war were arrested and tried. Valerian nobles who had pushed for conflict lost their positions and influence. The governments on both sides were forced to reckon with the fact that they had been manipulated by extremists who cared more about power than peace. Jake and Zara Quinn testified at the trials together. They presented evidence side by side. They told the truth about Katie's death and about how the war could have been avoided if anyone had been brave enough to stand against the extremists. Public opinion shifted dramatically. People who had spent years hating each other began to ask questions. If the leaders had lied about so much, what else had been lies? If a human commander and a Valerian princess could work together, what else was possible? Reconstruction began in earnest. Human engineers and Valerian architects worked together to rebuild the destroyed cities. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges resumed. It was not perfect. There was still anger and grief and suspicion, but it was a start. Jake was offered promotions and honors, but he turned most of them down. He accepted a new role as Earth's ambassador to the Valerian Reconstruction Council. It was the same position his father had held on Haven's Gate 20 years ago. He thought Katie would have appreciated the symmetry. Zara Quinn underwent her formal coronation as Queen of the Valerian Empire. Her first act as monarch was to formally recognize human sovereignty over the disputed territories in exchange for a mutual defense pact. Her second act was to establish the Katie Morrison Foundation, dedicated to promoting peace, education, and cultural exchange between species. They saw each other often in their new roles. Sometimes it was official meetings about treaties and trade. Sometimes it was quieter moments, sharing tea and talking about the past. They had become friends, bound together by shared grief and shared purpose. 6 months after the memorial attack, they met at Haven's Gate again. The gardens had been fully restored now, more beautiful than ever. The purple trees glowed in the fading light. The fountain where two children had first met flowed with clear water. The monument stood in the center of it all. Two children holding hands, one human and one Valerian, frozen in bronze and crystal. The inscription read simply, "In memory of all who dreamed of peace." Jake and Zara Quinn stood before it in silence. Jake touched the pendant he still wore. Zara Quinn touched the bracelet on her wrist. "I still miss her," Zara Quinn said quietly. "Every day." "Me too," Jake said. "But I think we did what she would have wanted. We found each other again. We kept the promise. It was not the promise we made as children," Zara Quinn pointed out. Jake smiled, a real smile that reached his tired eyes. Katie always said things worked out in weird ways. I think she would say this counts. They sat on a bench near the fountain, watching the two moons rise over the gardens. It was peaceful here. The war felt like something from another lifetime, though it had been less than a year since the final battle. "What will you do now?" Zara Quinn asked. "You have spent your entire adult life as a soldier. Being an ambassador must feel strange." "Terrifying," Jake admitted. "But someone smart once told me that Katie did not let fear stop her. I figured I should try to be half as brave." Zara Quinn laughed, her skin pattern shifting to warm, happy colors. "I think I have heard that somewhere before. From a very wise Valerian queen," Jake said. They sat together as the stars came out. Two people who should have been enemies, brought together by tragedy and kept together by determination. The war had taken so much from both of them, but sitting here, in the place where it all began, they could feel something new growing in the spaces where grief had lived. Hope. Real hope. Not the naive dream of children, but the hard-won faith of people who had seen the worst and chosen to build something better anyway. "Do you think other species are watching us?" Zara Quinn wondered. Humans and Valerians were supposed to destroy each other. That is what everyone predicted. "They are definitely watching," Jake said. "And they are seeing something they did not expect. Two civilizations that went to war and came out the other side, not as enemies, but as partners. It will not be easy," Zara Quinn warned. "There are still people who hate each other. Still wounds that need time to heal. Nothing worth doing is easy," Jake replied. "But Katie taught us that, did she not? She was 10 years old and decided to be friends with an alien princess. That should have been impossible. But she did it anyway." Zara Quinn reached over and took Jake's hand. It was a simple gesture. One friend comforting another. But it was also more than that. It was a human and a Valerian choosing connection over division. It was two people who had every reason to hate each other, choosing something different. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up." for being willing to see past what I represented, for honoring her memory the way she deserved. Thank you for the same, Jake said. And for reminding me that my sister was not wrong, that her dream was not childish or naive, that believing in peace does not make you weak. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened. Somewhere in the city, humans and Valerians were sharing meals and swapping stories and learning to be neighbors. Somewhere else, children of both species were playing together, too young to remember the war. The future was unwritten. There would be setbacks and struggles. Old hatreds would not disappear overnight. But for the first time in 20 years, that future held possibility instead of certainty. It held the chance for something better. Jake looked at the monument again, at the two bronze children holding hands. I used to wonder why Katie bothered. Why she worked so hard to be friends with someone so different. It would have been easier to stay with human kids, to avoid the complications. And now? Zara Quinn asked. Now I think she understood something adults forget, Jake said. That the things worth having are usually complicated. That friendship is not about finding people exactly like you. It is about finding people who make you better than you are, alone. She made both of us better, Zara Quinn said. Even though she is gone, she is still teaching us. She was always smarter than me, Jake admitted with a sad smile. Little sisters usually are. 5. They stayed until the moons were high in the sky. Eventually, duty would call them both back to their responsibilities. Jake had diplomatic meetings. Zara Quinn had a government to rebuild. The work of peace was endless and exhausting. But for now, they sat together in the gardens, where their lives had intersected all those years ago. Two people, bound by loss, united by purpose, carrying forward the dream of a 10-year-old girl who believed friendship could change the universe. And maybe, just maybe, she had been right all along. Years later, historians would point to the memorial attack as the turning point. The moment when humans and Valerians stopped being enemies and started becoming allies. They would study the friendship between Ambassador Jake Harrison and Queen Zara Quinn as a model for interspecies cooperation. But Jake and Zara Quinn never forgot where it really started. In gardens on a distant world, with a human girl and an alien princess who refused to let differences define them, with a promise made by children who believed in something better. Katie Morrison never lived to see the peace she dreamed of. But her dream survived her. It survived 20 years of war and billions of deaths. It survived hatred and fear and every attempt to destroy it. Because her brother and her best friend made sure it did. The pendant and the bracelet, once symbols of loss, became symbols of hope. Jake wore his openly now. And when people asked about it, he told them about his sister. Zara Quinn did the same with her bracelet. Katie's story spread. The girl who saw past species and politics to simple kindness. And in the gardens of Haven's Gate, the monument stood watch over a new generation, learning the lessons the old one had forgotten. That peace is possible. That friendship can transcend any divide. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in something better, even when the whole universe tells you it is impossible. Katie Morrison had believed. And in the end, that belief changed everything.